Yeah. So, greetings and welcome to the second webinar of Climate Dialogue series, and a special thanks to all our panelists and participants who joined us from different parts of the world, despite the time differences. So, Lisa over here has joined us from Paris, which is very early over there, and in our attendees also we can see people from different time zones to pour in. Ben will be here shortly with us from Britain. It's very early over there again, so we are very glad for people to accommodate this into their busy schedule. Before we begin, just wanted to give a background briefly about us and why we are doing this particular webinar. So we at Civic Data Lab work to harness the power of open knowledge movement using data, technology, design, and social science. And we aim to enhance informed citizen participation in matter of governance from one end, and to help build capacity of decision makers to cultivate data-informed practices from the other end. We have been working across different sectors, namely public finance, open contracting, law and justice, urban development, and digital public goods. In the past few years, however, climate change lens have become quintessential to better understand all any of these sectors, honestly. So climate change is not now any myth or a distant thing. It's a very real global threat, which is not sticking to any particular national boundary. And as such, the idea behind the series Climate Dialogue is to create a channel that can facilitate sharing of knowledge and learn success stories from our peers across those nation boundaries. The key focus of the series is on how technology and data-driven ways can help advance the climate change adaptation. We kickstarted this series in May by learning from Asian leaders. By learning from Asian leaders about several implementation stories of free and open source software solutions for climate change adaptation in their respective countries. And we received a wonderful response by people who were more than willing now after this session to reach out to connect and see how these can be scaled in their respective countries. So we hope that is a trend that can be continued with other webinars of the series as well. So the second webinar of the series, that is today, we are going to focus on harnessing public procurement data for delivering green solutions. Why we need to focus on it is basically because government across the world are often single largest purchaser of goods and services in their countries. And as such, the imprint on environment by them is huge. In today's webinar, we hope to discuss with our esteemed panelists on how this purchase can better respond to the issues of climate change. So before moving forward, as Moina was discussing earlier, uh, we just wanted to take a second to highlight that how not just at Civic Data Lab, we all of us in general try to find a balance and diverse panel, but we are very glad for this very positive imbalance with all women panel, and we are certain that it will bring in center a very diverse set of perspective, which is needed for harnessing public procurement data for delivering green solutions. Before I go on any further and introduce our panelists, there are a few guidelines basically for the audience so that we ensure that this is a safe space and things can run smoothly. So this is about connecting people through open and thoughtful conversation. We want our listeners to share their views and exchange ideas in a safe and inclusive space. Your voice matters, and as such, discussions are moderated only for stability. Just a few pointers for the attendees. Make sure that your chats and queries are related to the topic and subject being discussed. Please post your questions in Q&A box and any other remarks or introduction in your chats. Um, Feel free to elaborate your points to make it effectively travel across people. Your chat inquiry will be rejected if it contains any kind of spam, insult, profanity, incoherence, or inflammatory language, or threat to any kind, or attack on identity of any commentator, speaker, or attendee. Um, we will ensure that the person will be needed to be removed if there are continuous attempts to repost chats or queries that have been previously rejected, if the nature of comment any undertone of any kind of discrimination, or if there's a risk of security and attempted site issues. And thank you so much. I'll just pause over here and request all our attendees. Now we see we already have 30 attendees to start populating the chats over here. Introduce yourselves so the panelists have better sense of who they are talking to. And without further ado, let me just introduce our wonderful panelists today. So our keynote speaker, Ms. Laya Madduri, is stuck at a meeting with ministry and she'll be joining us shortly. But we can start with our panelists. So we have today with us Ms. Lisa Vincent Eden and from Policy Research and Advice, OECD Public Governance Directorate, Infrastructure and Public Procurement Division. She has worked on numerous projects like survey on green public procurement in OECD countries, on recommendations and policy options for greater adoption of life cycle costing methodology in public procurement in Hungary, and on identifying good practices in Norway and other OECD countries on incorporating human rights considerations into public procurement. We look forward to hearing from her today more about what has worked in different countries for greener access to public procurement processes. Then we have today Management Center in India. Dr. Shilpi is a trained economist and has over 13 years of research experience in the field of environment and natural resource management. One of her key focus areas of research is designing policy instruments, governance, and institutional mechanisms to foster circular economy, which becomes central to the whole idea of green actions in government. She has worked on numerous projects for bilateral and multilateral organizations, industry, and different ministries and state in the government of India on a wide range of issues. We look forward to hearing from her today more on environmental management, circular economy, and policy instruments for greener action in the public procurement process. And last but not the least, we have with us Ms. Bernadine Friends, who is also a dear friend of not just me, but of the organization, and we continuously look forward to her support. She's head of sustainability, infrastructure, and Asia at Open Contracting Partnership. She graduated from London School of Economics with an MSc in Environmental and Development and has over 20 years of experience across the legal, consulting, and international development sectors. Before joining OCP, Bernadine was Associate Director and Regional Manager for Latin America and Southeast Asia at Cost International, the Infrastructure Transparency Initiative. She led concept design and implementation of complex multi-stakeholder programs aimed at improving the business environment, fighting corruption, and delivering value for money from infrastructure investment. Since then, she has worked extensively on renewable and conventional energy technology and infrastructure and supporting public procurement reforms across the country along with OCPP. We hope to hear from her today on possible data-driven ways for greener public procurement processes. Thank you again to all our panelists and attendees to join today with us. And so I will now just pause and request our first panelist, Ms. Lisa, to start with her session.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen now. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, good morning. At least it's the morning in Paris. Thanks for having me today. So my name is Lisa van den Enden, and I'm working as a policy analyst at the OECD. And so today I wanted to focus my presentation on green public procurement and on the OECD work on green public procurement. So first, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit and to explain, maybe to mention briefly first the principle of value for money, which is linked to green public procurement. So the principle of value for money is what guides public procurement decision and action. And for a long time, countries were focusing on the economic aspect, but now what we see is that they are increasingly understanding that the concept of value for money should also encompass a variety of aspects and policy, taking into account emerging and pressing topics such as climate change. So when we speak about green public procurement, so it's linked with this principle of value for money because it means using the public sector's purchasing power to achieve environmental objectives. So GPP, so Green Public Procurement, is an important tool to achieve environmental policy goals relating to climate change, resource use, and sustainable consumption and production, especially given the importance of public sector spending on goods and services in Europe. And what we saw at the OECD is that over the past decade, GPP has shifted from this do less harm to a more proactive approach, whereby public procurement is used to achieve environmental objectives. It can promote the use of greener products and services by public authorities, but it can also serve a broader development purposes by helping governments achieving their national policy goals, such as reducing pollution, improving resource efficiency, promoting more sustainable production, and reducing the emission of greenhouse gas that contribute to climate change. So when we speak about green public procurement, we speak about public procurement, and I just wanted to remind of the significant global impact that public procurement has. It represents a sizable part of the global economy. So as you can see, public procurement expenditure as a share of GDP actually increased significantly across the OECD over the last decade, from 11.8% of GDP in 2007 to 12.9% of GDP in 2021. It also represents 27.8% of general government expenditure in OECD countries. And it is used across all spending functions, from health to environmental protection, public order, and economic affairs. And as the COVID-19 crisis demonstrated, public procurement strategies, practices, and systems, they actually directly affect the quality of life and the well-being of citizens. So it's very important that countries aim for maximum efficiency, effectiveness, and value for money in public procurement. So here I just wanted to explain that the topic of green public procurement, it is particularly important for us at the OECD. And that is why it is covered in one of the 12 principles of the OECD recommendation on public procurement, so in the principle of balance. This principle calls on countries to ensure the strategic and holistic use of public procurement. And in doing so, the recommendation specifically defined the broader policy objectives to be pursued, including sustainable green growth and standards for responsible business conduct. So GPP's mention is in principle of balance, but you should know that this works as a kind of ecosystem. So all the 12 principles, they work together, they work to reinforce each other. So green public procurement is linked with balance, but also with capacity, efficiency, e-procurement. And so it's not just one principle. And we also have the recommendation on the governance of infrastructure adopted by the OECD in July 2020. And they highlight the role of public procurements and recommend that states ensure efficient and effective procurement of infrastructure projects by promoting competition, sustainability, and responsible supply chains. So public procurement is very important for infrastructure. It is used by government to invest in public infrastructures. Procurement is an essential part of the infrastructure life cycle. So it's very important that it is directed towards generating broader values in terms of economic, environmental, and social benefits. And on the previous slides, on the recommendation on governance of infrastructure, public procurement is mentioned also as an enabling condition to deliver sustainable infrastructure. So it's a very important part of the governance of infrastructure. So why do we promote, why do we focus on green public procurement? Well, for several reasons. So first, it contributes toward local, regional, national, and international environmental policy goals, such as reducing CO2 emissions. And to mention that the Nordic Council report actually established links between sustainable public procurement and all the sustainable development goals, finding out that public procurement can be linked to 82% of the SDG indicators. But green public procurement is also a driver for innovation because it provides organization solution. It also encourages the market to develop new and greener solutions. It provides also financial saving in a life cycle cost perspective, making sure that that states purchase energy efficient products. So at the OECD, we launched a survey on green public procurement in 2022, to which 34 OECD countries responded. And the survey had 4 pillars: policy and strategic framework, public-private interaction, evaluation of impact, and capacity building and support. And so the results show that GPP is widely recognized as a powerful tool to achieve the climate action goals that countries have endorsed. So 94% of OECD countries have adopted an active national GPP policy or framework. We also find out that to ensure alignment with global commitments on climate action, countries regularly revise their GPP policies. So 63% have updated it in the past 3 years to target high impact sectors and to move towards cleaner products more rapidly. Finally, 88% clearly refer to GPP or public procurement in national commitments on climate action and consider this government function as integral to achieving their environmental commitments. So what I really wanted to show is that there is a real big uptake of GPP in OECD countries and that it's really considered to be a true lever to achieve their environmental objectives. So despite the effort to support GPP and the fact that it's really widespread, mainstreaming green objective in government's procurement practices still faces several challenges, as we can see on the slide. So the perception that GPP products are more expensive than conventional ones remain a key barrier to GPP implementation. Public officials also frequently raise the lack of government legislation and political support as strong barriers. And these results also highlight that procurement officers across OECD countries lack information and data about purchasing green alternatives. They lack some tools and training to conduct research and to engage with the market. So they lack knowledge on how to procure in more innovative and greener way. And those results, they actually echo the 2015 survey on GPP, where the most commonly mentioned obstacles to going green were feared that green products cost more, lack of technical knowledge and training, and lack of monitoring to see if green policy works. So the obstacles are quite the same, which means that things have not really improved in the meantime in those areas. So what kind of actions and support can we develop to promote green public procurements? So at the OECD, we support countries enhancing their public procurement system from different angles. So for us, GPP should be viewed as an horizontal topic. So for instance, we encourage the development of regulatory and strategic frameworks. So we believe that it's important to ensure policy coherence and consistency among procurement practices across levels of government. It's also important that the broad objectives in GPP policies are translated into more tangible obligation to monitor the implementation. So for example, 41% of OECD countries have set a mandatory requirement to use green public procurements, and 29% have set targets in terms of share of procurement subject to GPP. Some countries have adopted both, and some countries have adopted neither. So it's also important to translate GPP in the tender documentation using GPP criteria and awards. So for example, when assessing ability to perform a contract, public buyers may take into account specific experience and competence related to environmental aspects, which of course are relevant to the subject matter of the contract. They may ask for evidence of the ability of operators to apply environmental and supply chain management measures. They may also exclude operators who are in breach of environmental law. At the award stage, it's possible to apply environmental award criteria and to allocate points during the award stage to recognize environmental performance beyond the minimum requirements, knowing that there is no set maximum on the weighting you can give to environmental criteria. We also encourage and promote market engagements because it helps suppliers to understand better what is required of them to be able to be considered for the bid. And it helps actually to promote both competition and performance improvements. So according to our survey, less than half of the respondents have guidance on how to assess market capabilities to respond to GPP. So it's clearly an area where there is room for improvement. We also work a lot on professionalization of public buyers, and we put a great emphasis on the knowledge and capabilities on GPP. So we believe that GPP guidance materials, buyer's guides, manuals, toolkits, they are essential to support GPP implementation. And there is actually already a lot of resources that are available online. There is also a need to work on GPP monitoring because what we choose to measure is often a statement of what we value, and countries need to show that they value GPP. So according to the survey, 38% of OECD countries report on GPP policies impacts, such as impact on greenhouse gas emission, and are able to understand how they are contributing to meeting their sustainability goals, which is not a big number. But at the OECD, we have developed a wide public procurement measurement framework that will be published very soon to support countries in monitoring different aspects of the public procurement, including sustainability aspects. Finally, as public procurement can be impacted by a wide range of risks that can affect the procurement process itself, it's important to develop risk management system. And a 2018 survey actually found that only 52% of countries had developed a strategy for the assessment, prevention, and mitigation of public procurement risks at the national level. So we developed a risk management framework, which also include risks related to sustainability, such as environmental risks and risks related to the purchase of products with a negative impact on the environment. And those risks need to be included in the tender. So this is just some example of OECD work on sustainable infrastructure in Asia. So as part of the regional policy network on sustainable infrastructure, the network worked to provide a policy regional forum for policy discussion, to disseminate good practice and evaluation tools on infrastructure delivery, and to distill main lessons from the network's activities and meetings into concrete policy advice. And if you go on our website, we have a lot of thematic reviews on green public procurement and infrastructure, some country projects. We also have some tools that are available and accessible, like the infrastructure governance toolkits and the public procurement toolbox, where you can find some case studies, indicators, example of good practices that are all free of use. And that was all from our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for a wonderful presentation. We have some questions already in place, but before we go ahead with it, a lot of participants have joined since. I would like to repeat the structure of the presentations and webinar. So we just heard from Lisa. The structure is each panelist speaks for around 10 minutes, and then we have a few minutes for Q&A. So during that panelist, please feel free of participants to pop in question and answer box, and then we can take up the questions after the panelists have given the presentations. So yes, we'll just get started with Q&A with Lisa. So one question that we have received is from Esteban, which is how could I use open data to check if a specific government has good or bad GPP practice? And that is something even I was thinking as you were talking about how measuring framework becomes very critical for knowing successful implementation of GPP, and that OECD is developing a measurement framework. Can you talk about briefly the framework and measuring indicators that you were talking about?
Yes, I can. So the framework is not published yet, but it will be published soon. And so, yes, the idea is that we think that first countries need to have these strategic frameworks in place where they will adopt some concrete objectives, some concrete targets, because that helps to then measure, like, have you achieve these targets or not. So that would be the first steps. And then the measurement framework, we think that it's important to develop key indicators. And so we have provided a list of indicators for social, for environmental, for economic aspects. And for example, it will be like the number of tenders, including green criteria, things like that. That would be some of the indicators. And so the idea really of this measurement framework is to provide countries with example of indicators that they can put in place and how they can measure them. And of course, what will ease this measurement framework is to have e-procurement system in place, because you can enter the data more easily and we'll process the data for you. So as I mentioned, the 12 principles that we have in the OECD recommendation, they all work together. So we have e-procurement, we have capacity also, so it means training also the procurement workforce to use the data, how to enter the data, how to use new e-procurement process. So I think it's really everything really works together. So even if you have this measurement process in place, you still need to train your people. You still need to explain how important it is to achieve your green objective and how green public procurement actually help you do that, and to really have this culture in the organization. But again, the paper will be published very soon. It's in the finalization stage, and it will be published online, so we'll all be able to access it and to use the key indicators that we have developed.
Thank you, Lisa. And actually, what you spoke very beautifully blends into the second question that we have in the box. That is, successful implementation of GPP will require knowledge creation in an unprecedented scale. There's a lot of capacity building and knowledge which is now required. How can we ensure that it is created and open so that the cost remains low and that private profits are not affected greatly if you're talking about a GPP? And this question has been raised by Arun from India.
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat just the end of the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So how can we ensure that the knowledge required for implementation of GPP is created in open access manner so that the cost remains low and it is not affecting the of private sector?
Yes. So, well, first of all, you should know that there is already a lot of green public procurement toolkit, guidance, training that are available online. So, for example, the European Commission, they have developed a series of, for example, life cycle costing tools, calculation tools, for computers, monitors, indoors lighting, outdoors lighting. They're all accessible online. And they have also developed a GPP toolkit, so the Green Public Procurement Training Toolkit, where you can find training courses and workshop for public buyers. So that's a first thing. If you go online, there's already many tools. And what we did at the UCD is kind of sharing these existing tools also with our counterparts, with the country we work with. And we also encourage them every time they create a platform or training for it to be also accessible online, because when it's online, you reach a greater number of people. You can then share this tool. You can also develop some tools that require, if other countries, people from other country wants to use it, you can also make them pay some fees. And we believe that if you want to reach a bigger number of people, it's better for the tools to be online, to be training tools online. Yeah, I don't know if that's answered the question.
I think it really answers and also guides us to where to look for. So thank you so much for that. And I have a question actually as well. Yeah. So you emphasized how value for money is a key driver for public procurement. And when we work with countries which are yet to move towards GPP, it becomes like a limiting factor, that the assumption is GPP means spending more money instead of more efficient way of spending money. So how do you convince government that GPP can be implemented without costing too money a lot?
Yeah, so there is different aspects we believe that need to be taken into account. The first one, I think, it's to foster this culture into the organization. So really explaining what are our objective and how green public procurement can help us towards this objective, and also make public buyers, feel more valued, that their job actually contribute to fight change. I think that's important. And the other important thing is we need to kind of prove to public buyers and the markets that purchasing green products actually cost less on the long term and help us achieve environmental commitment. And to do so, we need some monitoring. So we need to measure how, for example, it's Korea and Japan, they have this system in place where they measure the impact of GPP policies on CO2 emissions. And so they're able to give concrete numbers, concrete reductions, and that also it's concrete proof for the market, public buyers, that it actually works. And we have this project with Hungary, where we develop some life cycle costing tools and strategies for the countries, where we really want to explain that it's important to take all the costs into consideration when you purchase a product, and not just the purchasing price, because you also have like some disposal costs and maintenance costs and end-of-life costs that need to be taken into account. So even if when you buy the product, it seems very expensive, you need to understand that at the end, if you buy a better product, a more efficient and efficiency product, you will actually pay less at the end. And we also encourage countries to have this cost-benefits assessment and to really be able to see at the end what would be the best product. So I think it's having this culture in the organization. It's having the capacity also to conduct this cost assessments studies. So it means some training. It's developing monitoring systems, and it's communicating also a lot with the market, engage with the market. Yeah, I think that would be the main enablers.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And sorry for being greedy, but there's one last question, and we have this over here. So actually, there are two questions. I'm trying to just club them together now. One question is, what have been exemplary success about implementation of GPP in terms of countries? Which countries do you see have quite good success story with GPP? And how have they tackled the issue of market readiness?
Okay, so first about example of countries. While we often cite the Netherlands, I don't know if participants or if I can briefly explain, because the Netherlands, they've developed a very interesting tool called the CO2 performance ladder. So they give preference to bidders showing the commitment to reduce their CO2 emissions or using certified green technology to increase their chances of winning the contract. So it means that the contractor has the option to obtain what is called a CO2 performance ladder certificate, and it grants them certain benefits. And these certificates allows for a deduction in the submission price and hence their probability of securing the contract. And so that's an example of a great tools that encourage the markets to reduce their CO2 emissions. And we also have some great examples of monitoring GPP in, well, as I mentioned, in Korea and in Japan. And we have what also is a great tool that we saw in countries that some countries, they provide incentives to the market, so financial or non-financial incentives. They can be also very useful, like in Korea. So in Korea, the government may grant rewards to public institutions, business operators, relevant organizations, etc., which have excellent purchase records of green products or have contributed to encouraging the purchase of green products. So yeah, Netherlands is a good example. Korea is a great example where GPP is a success. And about market readiness, the most important thing is to consider the market as an ally and not as an enemy, and to communicate as early as possible in the tendering process with the market, and to make sure to give them, like, to be sure that they know what we are expected from them, and to make sure that the market is ready. And so, for example, it's in the United Kingdom that they organize supplier debriefing. So after the tender, they go back to their supplier and they ask them, what do you think worked? What do you think did not? How could we do it better? How would you have it to be done? So it's really about engaging as much as possible and as early as possible with the markets, and to make sure, you know, market engagement and, I mean, all the criteria that you will put, the Green Public Procurement criteria that you will put in your tender. The idea is not to exclude bidders, but it's to have as much bidder as possible. And if you want to have as much as possible, you need to give some incentives, you need to communicate with them, you need to engage with them. I think that is key against market readiness.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We have two very important questions again, but I'll request participants to please be patient with us. Let us go through the round of all the sessions, and then we can take up common questions, hopefully. But in the interest of time, I will just park these questions for now. I'll request our second speaker now, Dr. Shilpa Kapoor, for whom I think it's a wonderful segue talking about life cycle cost, to a scholar of circular economy. So we will hear from Dr. Shilpa Kapoor more now on dealing the public procurement, government and instruments which can actually help facilitate it for the countries. So welcoming Dr. Shilpa Kapoor, and reminder to all our panelists then please pop in questions in the Q&A box and the chat box for general introduction or any remarks that you might have. Over to you, Dr.
Yeah,
Shruti.
thanks, Kabeer. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you to CivicDataLabs for inviting me, giving me an opportunity to share some of my work. So basically, what I have done is, in keeping in mind the broader topic and the agenda of today's webinar, I have tried to structure my presentation around the key issue of how sustainable public procurement or public procurement can actually help in transition to a circular economy. So I'll touch briefly on all the concept and the relation between the two. If I have time left, I also have few slides on the recent work that we are doing with the Government of India, supported by UNEP, on the procurement of services, fostering sustainable procurement of services in India. So before I get into that, Green Public Procurement, Lisa has very nicely, set the context. So I'm not going to spend time, but what I would like to emphasize is that moving from green to sustainable. So Green Public Procurement, of course, has been in for quite some time. With a focus on minimizing the adverse environmental impacts, but moving beyond green public procurement to sustainable public procurement, where you bring in the other dimensions of sustainability also, which is social and economic, is what I'm going to focus on. For sustainable public procurement, the 10YFP's SPP program has defined it as a process where the public organization meet their needs for goods, services, works, and utilities in a way that achieves value for money on a whole life cycle basis, so that that's where becomes part of the economic context comes in. And it generates benefit not only to the organization, but to the society also. And while significantly helping reduce the negative impact on the environment. A lot of push to the SPP came in, of course, through the SDG. So the SDG indicator 12.7.1 specifically looks at the number of countries implementing SPP policies and action plan. And there's a lot of support coming from multilateral organizations, the government itself in different countries to kind of help these countries look towards meeting this goal. In terms of benefits of sustainable public procurement, again, important to highlight that it comes with benefits linked to efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. Good governance and procurement would also bring in benefits in terms of economic savings, improved quality of goods, works, and services procured. Also, it will give an opportunity for procurement of some of the cutting-edge technologies and services. An advancement of a corporate circular economy procurement approach through the sustainable public procurement can also help generate economic gains, benefits from the side of reducing expenses on maintenance and waste management. And it will become a bit clearer towards the later part of the presentation. Also, innovation is a key aspect which sustainable public procurement actually fosters. So it can be a major driver for innovation, providing industry with real incentives for developing green products and services. Also, it's particularly true in sectors like construction, health, which have larger shares in the market. And again, in terms of there are criteria linked to sustainability, it can again encourage them to come up with innovations, alternatives, which can kind of help meet those requirements of the criteria and in general foster sustainability. But of course, there are many challenges too. So is innovation required from the bidders, or somebody else does the innovation and then the bidder can use the output of that innovation to be able to meet the requirement on the sustainability criteria? Many a times there are innovations which are there, but they don't get encouraged and rewarded. So like yesterday, I was at a UNEP workshop where we were presenting our work on the sustainable public procurement of waste management services and cleaning services. And we had an industry participant who has come up with a solution which is kind of does away with the odor linked to waste or any toilets, etc. But then he's not able to get the buy-in of many of the procurers on that product, because one, there is no competition to that product. So again, that kind of goes against him. And then there is not enough information about what the product brings in and that the benefits linked to it. Currently, there is no criteria on sustainability or in the procurement linked to use of such products. So many a times the innovation also does not achieve the success which it could. Also, procurement to foster innovation, it's also important to incentivize innovation. And again, the incentivization to innovation could come at the level where the actual innovation is coming about. whether it's say at an R&D facility where say an alternative materials or alternative products are being researched upon, or the innovation could come to an industry player if they are looking at coming up with products or materials which can foster sustainability. In terms of the barriers and challenges to SPP, there are quite many, and that's also one of the reasons why currently, again, there's a lot of work going on to kind of address some of these barriers to kind of foster the whole SPP and through as part of SPP, circular procurement, and many other related areas. So there's lack of practical tools and information. There's need for systematic implementation and integration into management systems. So many a times the procurer is looking at compliance to certain management systems, be it quality, be it related to environment, be it related to your workplace. But there are other aspects of sustainability which may not get reflected in these management systems. There's lack of training or capacity building, which is in fact has been identified as one of the key areas which needs to be looked into and focused upon to kind of push this whole public procurement, sustainable public procurement agenda. There's also lack of cooperation between authorities and kind of disconnect which exists. Limited established criteria for products and services, both on the environmental and social side, and limited, this is a typo. In terms of looking at sustainable public procurement in context of India, so India too, of course, a lot of push initially started with the push on green public procurement. Then also there was emphasis on moving towards using public procurement with sustainable public procurement as a move towards low carbon economy. There have been a lot of initiatives by the railways. They are in fact one of the largest public procurers in the country. And they have done a lot in terms of fostering sustainability into their procurement. And they are in fact have been identified as one of the key players in this whole public procurement discourse. In terms of the other regulations, laws, and key publications, there have been some publications, knowledge products, which are to guide the whole procurement to become sustainable or green. In terms of the policy push, as we are all aware, we don't have any policy per se on procurement. But there have been these general financial rules integrating some of the elements of sustainability, which have also tried to push forward or take forward the procurement in a sustainable manner. The draft National Resource Efficiency Policy, which came out in 2019 and unfortunately never got notified or saw the light, that also emphasizes on the need for sustainable public procurement. And then to highlight again, UNEP has really been supporting the government of India in taking forward the agenda through different means. In India, the public procurement share is estimated to be as high as 20 to 22%. Of course, I've seen some later numbers, some recent numbers, which also say that it's about 30%. The procurement as a subject does not come into the union, state, or concurrent list of the government's legislative functions. So Union Parliament has the exclusive power to make any laws on the subject of procurement, but it cannot enact a legislation. India does not have any single overarching legislation or policy related to public procurement. It's governed by a mix of some regulatory legal frameworks. Some of it gets also reflected in some of the waste rules. Procurement at the level of procuring gets carried out differently by ministries, department, municipal, local bodies. And there are many public sector entities also like NTPC, ONGC, railways I've already mentioned, some of the Department of Highways, Transport, etc., who have also started bringing in the environmental criteria. Initially, it was more towards through the energy efficiency, but now the scope is expanding. So this is just a snapshot of the existing legislative and the constitutional provisions and administrative guidelines, which kind of constitute the framework for public procurement in India. Just to highlight few of the things, if you look at the general financial rules, they also have rules pertaining to bringing in focus on environmental life cycle, social aspects. I've just highlighted few of these here. I'm not going to get into the details. If you look at the rule, just 173 of the GFR, it specifically talks about procuring electric appliances shall ensure notified threshold or higher star rating. If you look at the manual for procurement of goods, which has gone through multiple updates, again, there has been emphasis on bringing in environmental criteria, bringing in social criteria, also bringing in this whole focus on Make in India. So again, you can see that the government is quite keen on this agenda, and in different ways it gets reflected. Now moving on to the circular economy, before I bring in the context of procurement in circular economy. So circular economy, just few slides on for those who may or may not be that familiar with the topic. It's a regenerative economic system. It talks about transition from take, make, dispose to take, make, use, and regenerate resource model. It's being looked at as a new model for sustainable development and green economies. It kind of enables us, encourages us, motivates us to redesign both the production and the consumption system, because it brings in a role of different stakeholders, including producers, consumers, and many other. Circular economy also brings in focus on all the three dimensions of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. These are just some definitions which again emphasize. There are different R's in circular economy. The first most common is the 3R: reduce, reuse, recycle. But there are many other R's if you look at, which is repurpose, remanufacture. And the whole idea is that when a material or a product reaches its so-called end of life, you can use it to convert it into a secondary raw material. You can use it to convert it into another product. And then when you're even designing or making products or materials to begin with, you can have focus on different R's, like reduce. Do you actually need that much of a material into making a product? Can you redesign to make the product more environmental friendly, whether it from the point of view when it is getting used or at the time when it gets disposed? So this was just to kind of give you an idea. So there are multiple R's. I've also read articles where they talk about, I think, 19 R's. But as I said, it's the whole idea is that you kind of create a purpose for a material and or a product in a way that you don't put it back into the system as a waste very soon. So looking at sustainable public procurement and trying to make it circular would be a process by which authorities can purchase goods, services that seek to contribute in some way, close the energy and material loop within the supply chain, and at the same time minimizing the negative environmental impacts, waste creation. To make it a bit more easy to understand, so basically expansion of sustainable public procurement, as if you look at circular public procurement, just does not focus on some aspect of tendering. It sees how the procurement can bring in aspects of criteria whereby you can kind of ensure responsibility to the bidder to also look at the product or the service it's providing at its end of life. So not just provide a product or provide a service, but provide it in a way that you are able to close the loop. So there are 4 approaches which are commonly looked at in context of circular public procurement. One is procurement, including green public procurement, but based on circular criteria. So you look at products and services and bring in criteria linked to recyclability, share of recycled material, reuse potential, kind of packaging material used. Or you move on to a second approach where you look at procurement of new circular products and material. So again, you procure products which are easy to recycle, easy to dismantle, have a longer time span. So say again, through that promoting product life extension. Or a third approach where you look at procurement of services around new business models. So you have the leasing concept or you have the shared model. So again, different business models where you look not just as a product, but you look at it product as a service system. Then you look at the fourth approach is procurement promoting circular ecosystem. So you kind of look at procurement in a way that it promotes the whole ecosystem, makes the whole ecosystem more circular. So you look at supporting closing loops, you look at creating networks and alliances, look at waste as a resource. So product as a service, which I just mentioned in the previous slide, it becomes very relevant in context of circular economy. It's one of the key business models in circular economy. And it is now also emerging as a way in which services or products are also procured. So there are many examples of circular public procurement. I am just highlighting few. In Wageningen, circular procurement approach for city hall refurbishment was done, where furniture products were looked at not from just the angle of what their composition was, where the origin of the material was, but how those materials, when they reach end of their life, how can they be used? and also emphasis on no toxicity, and not looking at temporary packaging, looking at packaging which can be reused. There's another case of Lowland, a Danish municipality, where recycling and recyclability criteria for packaging were included in tenders for cleaning services. So if your cleaning services will require cleaning products, so those products will have to meet the criteria of the packaging of those products will need to meet criteria around recycling, recyclability. Also, it also had criteria, for example, at 75% of material used for bags, which are used as part of the cleaning process, must be recyclable or biodegradable. Monomaterials should not be used. So again, there are different ways in which these criteria around circularity could actually be integrated into the public procurement process to not just foster circularity, but sustainability in the longer run. In India, GEM portal is playing a key role, not just in fostering sustainable public procurement, but also in fostering circular economy. So on GEM, there's procurement happening both for products and services, but at the same time, there are also forward auction, which is happening, whereby opportunities for government organizations to auction their depreciated obsolete assets like electronic goods, etc. There's a buyback option also available in certain categories of goods. Ministry of Defense and Railways and central public sector enterprises are among some of the largest buyers of organizations on GEM. And many of these services, like, for example, the ones which we delve deeper into, waste management and cleaning, have seen significant increase in the procurement happening through the GEM, thereby showing that there's actually significant potential if sustainability criteria could be integrated into those procurement to foster sustainability as a whole. So these aspects like provisions like forward auctions, etc., are promoting sustainable buying, also reuse, recycling, and responsible disposal. So the recent work which we did on SPP for services, we were looking at developing sustainability criteria for the procurement of cleaning, sanitation, and disinfection products and cleaning, sanitation, and disinfection services. So here we were looking at the procurement being done by the government agencies. Also, sorry, and this is the second scope of work which we looked at was the procurement of waste management services, be it around collection, segregation, collection, transportation, be it around collection, segregation, collection, transportation to treatment and processing. And some of the key considerations that we identified need to be looked at if you are trying to foster sustainability in the procurement of these services are around resource conservation efficiency, exclusions and preferences. Exclusions, for example, you exclude products or materials which are toxic, or looking at biodegradability, particularly linked to the products and packaging, adopting a life cycle analysis approach, looking at end of life of the products which are being procured, and also looking at whether they meet certain eco labels or not. Social considerations also are many which need to be looked at when you're trying to integrate sustainability into the procurement, which are around gender, compliance to labor laws, fair treatment, non-discrimination, permitting worker unions, no child labor, etc. Also looking at it not just for the organization or the bidder, but also looking at it how these aspects can also be fostered or integrated across the supply chain, which could be also include some of the informal workforce. So the criteria that we developed, I'm not going to go into detail, but just to kind of highlight to you, we identified certain pre-qualification criteria, but in terms of sustainability criteria, we categorized them into two buckets. One were basic and second were advanced. The whole idea of categorization into these buckets was that given the stage at which currently the procurement is, and also there are certain challenges which we are still facing, that basic criteria could be the ones which could be to begin with focused upon, and that there too also some kind of phased approach could be looked at, and advanced criteria over time could also be brought into the bucket. So for cleaning products, we looked at criteria around restricting certain cleaning products, chemicals, non-toxic substances, biodegradability, packaging, product delivery and labeling, and the use of energy while the products are used. In terms of advanced criteria, we looked at low flammability, so the flash points, bioaccumulation, environmental friendly packaging. So when we looked at packaging in basic, there it was that the packaging should be recyclable, etc. Whereas when we look at the advanced criteria, we've also suggested certain percentages in terms of the recyclable content in the packaging. So kind of being a bit ambitious, but at the same time looking at a longer term, being able to look at sustainability in a more comprehensive manner. In terms of the criteria which we identified for the services, basic was around the choice of cleaning products. So where the criteria would come from, the ones which we have identified for the cleaning products, training to staff, which is extremely important for them to deliver the service in a way that the sustainability aspects of the products are kind of used or kind of adhered to in the best manner possible. Also employment practices which a bidder would generally follow. And advanced criteria were many looking at accessibility, employability of disabled persons, operational practices, how well the engagement with the supplier or the tier 2, tier 3 is happening, the management systems that are in place, and aspects around waste and energy management. For waste management services, similarly, we had a set of pre-qualification and sustainability, where the sustainability was bifurcated into basic and advanced. And then again, there were multiple criteria listed. I'm not going to get into detail. But with all this background, some of the key intervention areas, both in terms of the policy, in terms of what collaborations, etc., could lead to or should focus on, is building capacity of the procurers. We also need to start thinking about having some kind of a framework for implementation of SPP and GPP. So this would include identifying priorities. I mean, even within sustainability, what are the sustainability aspects that we would like to start with, which are extremely crucial, and then over time kind of having a phased approach. Also, what kind of products and services we need to focus on. So like currently UNEP with this Government of India is focusing on certain products and services. But then again, identification of more products and services could be done using risk opportunity assessment, scope of improvement, what influence or how strong they are in terms of their potential in the market. It's also important to engage with the key existing and potential suppliers of products to come in on the criteria. They need to be told about these. And if we are looking at also fostering circularity, the aspects around circularity also need to be made aware of. Certifications and labels to identify standard sustainable alternatives is extremely important, and that's where we currently also lag. And there are some standards which are coming about, BIS is working upon, but in terms of certifications and labels to products and certain service categories, we actually don't have any labels and certifications currently existing. There are many in the international context. So if the bidder is able to adhere to these, nothing like those, but we also need to focus on developing our own domestic certifications and labels, which can be used by the products and the service providers to indicate their adherence or compliance to certain key sustainability criteria. Piloting sustainable public procurement with additional products is always a great way. And I think that's how the Indian Railways has also been doing over the period. And we could look beyond Indian Railways to work with certain selected local municipalities, where in fact, integrating aspects of circularity becomes extremely relevant and to an extent easy also, because they are also looking at waste. So if they're procuring products, if you can already integrate criteria linked to responsible disposal, responsible management, you are actually expanding your horizon and going beyond what you would be traditionally doing. Leveraging procurement power of the GEM platform to foster sustainable public procurement. Also, there's need to have some better tools to quantify and evaluate the sustainability aspects. So if you say a procurer or is looking at bringing in certain sustainability criteria, there has to be some tools for the procurer to kind of get an idea about the kind of benefits that these kind of criteria's integration would lead, and kind of evaluation of these different sustainability aspects to also be able to see which to push for first and then kind of define or the phased approach. Create sufficient documentation and dissemination of the whole concept of sustainable public procurement, so circular public procurement at the local, regional, national level, where actually the procurement is happening. And for these, certain tools like procurement guidelines for priority products, handbooks, standard bidding documents, etc., could be extremely helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I just wanted to check, in case you're sharing your video, it's not streaming.
Sorry?
In case you're sharing your video, it's not streaming. Just wanted to check.
Oh, I was not, because I have a bit of bad connectivity, but now I can.
All right, not an issue. Just wanted to check. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, Dr. Shilpi, and we have a lot of questions.
Sure.
In fact, 2 questions from the earlier panelists can also very well tie up to the presentation you made. So I don't know when will I get to ask my own questions, but let's start with the audience questions first. So one of the questions which actually comes again and again for a country which is trying to adopt GPP, uh, are there any specific product and categories that you see as low-hanging fruits that we can start with right away before trying to push for a huge legislative change altogether?
So I think there are some products already and services that have been identified by the government. So I think there's paper is one of the products, like room air conditioners. So there's a lot of work which UNEP has again done with the government of India, where green room air conditioners, in fact, now they are available on the GEM portal. So there is a procurement of green RACs happening. And now there's the whole push on servicing or green servicing around the use of the air conditioners. Then paper, I think, is quite a low-hanging fruit, given that it's kind of procured by most of the agencies. And you do have alternatives like recycled paper available or paper with certain recycled content available. So some of these low-hanging fruits are there, and that's the whole idea that one needs to look at, do some kind of an assessment in terms of identifying, looking at the products which are majorly procured, and then looking at, because you cannot push sustainable procurement till you have options on sustainability available around those products. So to kind of do a market analysis to see, so like even the work which we did when we were looking at pushing certain eco labels, because we don't have much, I mean, Green Pro by CII does have eco labels, does have some labels for cleaning products. But if say you want to bring in a more international perspective, we need to see whether those kind of products are even available. So it's a market assessment both for the identified or prioritized products, and before that, of course, prioritizing products. It could differ from sector to sector, but certain products, of course, are being, I mean, given preference by the government, and that's where the starting point has been.
Thank you. Another question we have is from Mr. Prakhar Pandey. Like you rightly mentioned, there are only piecemeal legislative requirements and scattered guidelines and policies like circular economy integration, eco-label, energy efficiency, green building, etc. However, these are mainly guiding and not enforceable factors. Where do you place lack of enforcement mechanism as a challenge? Would an umbrella law be helpful?
Yeah, so I think India did try looking at kind of an overarching SPP policy framework, but it did not happen for multiple reasons. But certainly, if you do have an overarching policy, that can be the guidance, I mean, that can become the guiding force behind looking at procurement at a more comprehensive and at a more, I mean, you can expand the way currently sustainable public procurement, you can certainly expand it once you have some kind of a guiding policy or aspect. And then again, this guidance again will need to be, I mean, to implement the policy, you will again need to have different instruments in place. But I would say, yes, maybe it's time that India now has recognized the importance of sustainable public procurement. It's doing quite a bit, that an overarching policy or a framework, which is kind of well defined, would foster the whole agenda forward further.
Thank you, Dr. Shipi. Another question we have is by Meghmala Chaudhary. How can the complexity of supply chains make it difficult to trace and verify the sustainability credentials, which is a very valid point, for products and services? What solutions are available to address this challenge?
So now, of course, when we look at, say, a product supplier, and of course, trying to push the product supplier to just look at sustainability criteria may not be completely in his hand, because he also has tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in its value chain. So that's where, again, now a lot of work is happening through having these kind of supplier code of conducts, and larger organizations, particularly, which have a lot of these MSMEs in their supply chain, can actually engage with these MSMEs and the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to kind of make them aware, make them understand what these criteria are, and then that they also need to, and kind of handhold them, support them, whether technically, through financially, or through guidance, to start looking at these criteria. But certainly, I mean, supply chain is it's a large area, it's still quite gray. And now a lot of these digital tools are coming about where you can use them to kind of start creating the traceability of your product chain. So like a lot of the waste management companies where they're trying to collect waste and source it, collect it, then kind of manage it, and then put it back into the system, are actually relying on the digital technology to create that traceability, which the consumer like us now is also wanting to look at. So if I have to kind of see a product which has certain recycled content, I need to know where that recycled content is coming from. So I think digital technology kind of can be an enabler, but it's again an engagement of a product manufacturer with its supply chain through different modes, including code of conducts, awareness, capacity building, that you can actually take it down to the lower levels and kind of then enable that the criteria fulfilled in an easier, in a more cost effective and an overall manner.
Thank you. This another question which I'll also try to plug in with my question, that whenever we talk about these changes, there's a huge component of a behavioral change, as well as there's a starting point of regulatory mechanism. So what do you think has been more successful, where we try to look for low-hanging fruit, push for certain demonstration of positive impacts, and then push for bigger regulatory framework? Or do you think regulatory framework is a prerequisite to be able to start actually even making smaller actions?
I think some bit can start first without there being a regulatory framework or a voluntary basis, so kind of as pilot projects. And once you see the output, once you see the results, then kind of that also, it's an evidence that builds up the case to have a policy design or an incentivizing mechanism to upscale or replicate those pilots. So, and in terms of the behavior, I mean, I totally agree that it's consumer behavior and consumer demand can actually play a key role in fostering sustainability. And again, looking at, say, if I as an individual, of course, I'm not going in for a public procurement, but at an individual level, if I'm aware of options available, and I'm able to say, particularly looking at products, again, looking at circular products which have recycled content, etc. If I'm made aware that things are transparent, traceable, I would also be encouraged to kind of create the demand for those products. But looking at the public procurement as a space, of course, government, given the quantum that it is procuring, I think if that demand comes in through these, if you will call this, I mean, these criteria, which may be kind of mandated criteria, so kind of will fall under the regulatory administrative instruments, will go a long way in creating that supply of those products. Once the supply is there, individuals like us would also have access to those, and our bucket of possible options expands, and we would also start looking at those alternatives.
In the interest of time, I'll just ask one more question and park the question for the end of the webinar.
Sure.
So the question is, whenever we talk about energy transition specifically and these new processes, it is also associated with loss of livelihoods. So are there any safeguards in place to avoid this when we are talking about GPP processes?
So again, GPP processes, so suppose if you are looking at waste management as a service, so waste management, say if a local municipality is procuring waste management services, so there would be a contractor. The contractor would be employing a lot of informal sector. Now to make the whole process of waste management and the so collection, segregation, recovery, etc. more efficient, you may need to bring in certain technologies. But if you could also have criteria linked to skilling the existing labor force, the informal sector, to be able to participate in that technology use. I mean, those are ways in which you can make this whole transition more just. So this is just an example from the waste space, but again, in the energy space, again, where you are looking at fostering renewable energy, if you are looking at procuring products which are more energy efficient, again, you'll have to go back to see what are the social implications, and there are ways in which those criteria could be integrated into your procurement. It's one currently people are not aware of. But there are those criteria. So as long as you are able to kind of identify those aspects, then look from the knowledge which already exists on the way those could be integrated through criteria, I think there is a solution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shilpi. Sujit, we'll pick up your question again. In the interest of time, we'll have to move to our next speaker as well. Welcome Ben to bring in another dimension of the whole discussion now on how centering data when we talk about public procurement and making it greener. So Ben, over to you. Please take the space and share your presentation.
Thank you
And
so much.
a small reminder to the participants, please type in your questions. We'll respond at the end of the session on the Q&A box. Ben, also please, can you check your audio once?
Yes, can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Audio is a bit low, but it's audible.
Okay, I will try to speak louder. Is that better?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you so much.
Sorry, there's a bit of traffic where I am here at the moment, but thank you so much again for inviting me. It's not often I'm up at 7 a.m. Here in London, but really delighted to be here at such an important endeavor. So I really appreciate the invitation and have really enjoyed the sessions from the previous panelists before me. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the next 10 minutes to talk a little bit about our work at Open Contracting. But first, I'd like to zoom out a little bit to talk about why public procurement matters. And some of our panelists, both Lisa and Dr. Shilpi, touched on this earlier in terms of the great amounts of investments and the great amount of money that's being spent on public procurement. And that's really important starting point, right? So it's $13 trillion that's spent in public contracts every year. It's a huge amount of money. But what I want to touch on in terms of this framing for my presentation is really thinking about why this matters not only for government in terms of the money that's being spent or in terms of the share of GDP, but why it matters for us, for people, and why it matters for the planet, given that we're talking about climate and green solutions today. So $13 trillion, that's everything being spent on pens, papers, equipment, medicines, infrastructure. That's huge amounts of money that goes into public contracts. And all of this public procurement spend is responsible for 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that's a huge contributor. And we know that as emissions rise, as temperatures rise, we will see, and we are seeing increasingly more and more extreme climate and weather events, and which we know disproportionately affect the poor and the most vulnerable. So again, that's the human impact there. And we also know that a huge chunk of this public procurement spend is going to be spent on infrastructure. It's going to be channeled to public infrastructure. Approximately $90 trillion will be invested in new infrastructure by 2030, and 75% of the infrastructure that will be in place by 2050 doesn't yet exist today. So again, that's huge. And as we all know, the infrastructure, when poorly planned, has devastating effects on the environment. So what are we going to do about it? How can we change the status quo? And how can we change the way that we spend public money so it delivers both for people and the planet? And increasingly, our partners at the Open Contracting Partnership are asking us to help them make public procurement more sustainable. But what does sustainable public procurement mean? And I think it's really important to really think about this question. And there was a question also by one of the participants in the Q&A, really asking about how we avoid greenwashing and whether we need and what we need to be clear about in sort of tender processes and contracts and things like that. And I think this is really the starting point. Because very often sustainability, sustainable public procurement, green procurement, ethical procurement, equitable procurement, they're all used interchangeably. And even though they're linked, they can mean, they mean very different things. So the starting point for any effective sustainable public procurement process or intervention, reform, transformation requires being clear about what your goals are. And here we see that true sustainability sits at the heart of this Venn diagram. So we're looking at the economic, social, and environmental aspects. What we see in this slide here is people, planet, and prosperity. So true sustainability sits at the heart of this Venn diagram, but we appreciate that not always can we hit the center of this diagram like each and every time. And some interventions may be very specific on the different circles in this Venn diagram. Let's break it down a little bit just to see what we're dealing with. So when we talk about socially responsible procurement, that's about procuring goods, services, and works in a way that's good for people. So to achieve better social outcomes, whether that's better health outcomes, better education outcomes, better access to infrastructure, for example. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, looking at prosperity, that's all about inclusive procurement. It's about economic growth, it's about shared prosperity, so job creation, livelihoods, opportunities for SMEs, MSMEs, women-owned businesses, gender focus, minority groups, things like that. And green procurement on the left-hand side is about procuring goods and services and works in a way that's good for the planet. And that's our focus today. So let's break this down a little bit more. So broadly speaking, when we talk about procuring for the planet, there are three large sort of subsets to this, and that's climate mitigation, climate adaptation, environment, and ecosystem services. And what does all of this mean? So we think about climate mitigation, that's about procuring goods, services, and works in a way that reduces emissions. The scope for this is vast. It can mean anything from buying local to reduce mileage from the goods and services that you're procuring. It can be investing in motion sensors for lights. It can be building low carbon infrastructure, for example, retrofitting buildings so that they're better insulated, so your energy consumption reduces, for example. There are many different ways, and this list obviously is not exhaustive. Climate adaptation is all about procuring goods, services, and works in a way that can help people adapt to the worst effects of climate change. So you may think about procuring drought-resistant crops or irrigation systems to support agriculture. You may want to think about building climate-resilient infrastructure to protect people from disasters. There are, again, many different ways. And similarly, for environment and ecosystem services, how can we procure goods, services, and works in a way that's good for the environment? And that may be reusing or recycling, as Dr. Shilpi mentioned, in terms of the circular economy. So we divert waste from landfills. It can be prohibiting the use of single-use plastics or plastic packaging. It can be looking at how we build infrastructure so that it protects sensitive habitats and wildlife. Now, there are lots of different ways in which we can achieve these broader sustainability goals, and being clear about what those goals are is one of the first steps. Now, next, we need to think about what are the tools at our disposal. There was a lot of conversation about this already today in terms of tooling and guidance and frameworks that can help us achieve these goals. And data is a big piece of that. So the starting point for any public procurement transformation really is the data, and looking at how data can help you, collecting, standardizing, and publishing good data. And this is where OCP can help. We've developed a whole raft of tools and guidance that can be used to help implementers buy better for the planet. For example, in this slide, you'll see that we have a guide for calculating sustainable public procurement using OCDS data. And one of the big things coming out of this is tagging your data. So very often, our implementers tell us that they can't actually measure their performance against sustainability goals because they don't have the right tags on their procurement data, which means that they can't easily identify which contracts have some sort of sustainability or green criteria, whatever those may be. So how you tag your data really can determine how deep your analysis can go. So for example, you could have broad tags like sustainability, mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, or more specific ones like emissions reductions, carbon sinks, disaster management, land use change, etc. And all of this will help you to automate analysis to check your progress and to check how close you are to hitting your goals or to hitting your targets. The other thing you may also wish to capture is whether or not that green goal is a principal focus of the contract, for example. So usually when there's a significant chunk of the budget that's allocated to it, so 100% of the budget, you can say that, you know, core to this contract or core to this tender, it's all about achieving a specific green goal, for example, you know, energy reduction, whatever it is. Or whether it's a significant focus, so maybe 40% of your budget, or if it's not targeted at all. These types of things will also help you to check your progress against your green goal. Now, I want to talk next about indicators. So we've developed targeted indicators that can help you make sense of the data. So for example, in this slide, we've developed the red flags for conservation guide. It looks at how to help identify risks from infrastructure projects and contracts to nature and natural capital. So we've identified 22 indicators as red flags for conservation, 31 indicators from our existing red flags for anti-corruption. So things that can identify corruption from public contracts and how that might also have a knock-on effect on conservation. I'm going to talk a little bit about what these red flags are and give you an example of what they might look like. So red flag for conservation, it could be, the starting point could be spatial information. So you might want to ask, is spatial information on the proposed project available? If no, that's a red flag, because that tells us that spatial planning is not happening. Now, if you do have spatial information, the next question you might want to ask is whether that proposed project area avoids any overlaps with conservation areas or sensitive areas. Again, if it doesn't avoid these overlaps, that's a red flag, because again, that suggests that your project is then encroaching on environmentally sensitive areas. Now, the third question you might want to ask is whether or not this overlap has been accounted for. So has there been any action that tries to mitigate the negative impacts from this project? So that could be environmental impact assessments, cost-benefit analysis, mitigation hierarchy, and the various other things. So again, if the overlap hasn't been accounted for, then that's a red flag. So these are different ways in which data and data tools can help you to identify when things are going right or when things are going wrong. And there are many other different red flags, for example, and there are many other different data tools that we've developed. I'm going to close with one of my favorite examples, and this is in partnership with CivicDataLab, our longtime friends and allies. So again, we talked a lot about data, and here what CivicDataLab did with the support of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, obviously with OCP, is really develop a data model to help inform disaster risk management in Assam. And there we collected, with CivicDataLab, we looked at lots of different data sets, from the climate and weather data, demographics data, things like infrastructure access, government spend in terms of contracts, and we plotted it out all on a map to try and understand which are the areas that are in greatest need of support. So where are people most vulnerable, where are the areas that are most flood prone, and where is the most damage? And you'll see in this map that sometimes, depending on what your priorities are, the answers may not always be so obvious, right? So in this slide, you'll see that flood-related tenders are concentrated in flood-prone areas and those demographically vulnerable areas, rather than those areas that are most damaged from floods. And so this can then inform future action, so that then the State Disaster Management Authority, for example, in the next phase of procurement, can look at what the interventions are needed to address the damage that are caused by these floods. So I'm going to stop there. The last thing I'll say in closing is that I've talked a lot about data, and obviously here at OCP we work a lot with data, but that's only the starting point, as I said before. The key to any effective transformation is really the partnerships that we build. And so, for example, with CivicDataLab, that has been a hugely successful partnership for us. And it's not just partnerships, obviously one-on-one, OCP and CDL, but also with the state government, trying to do things differently. Participation and inclusive approaches are really key. Capacity building, again, as Dr. Shilpi mentioned, to build up those capacities so that we can all respond better to achieve these goals, and this better procurement, buying better for the planet is what we need to really look at. So with that, Kabeer, I hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I'm quite glad how wonderfully connected to all the other presentations. So for example, when Lisa started mentioning about requirement of measuring actually the changes when we are talking about GPP, it cannot happen until we have data in a manner that could enable measuring or tagging. So similarly, when you are mentioning about having some open resources in place, that does cut down the cost of building capacity that people actually can use, and OCP has those guidebooks already out there, and OECD is developing frameworks. So it's quite nice how by the third panel all the threads are coming together. But before going further from my behalf, let me also quickly ask the question which has popped up. So one of the questions is, when we talk about sustainability criteria or say green criteria, it is multi-layered criteria. So a project like say might be tagged as a sustainable procurement in the data set. How deeper can we go when it in the red flag analysis, the kit that you're mentioning, when we go into the operation or operationalizing that particular tender? For example, the project of afforestation might require operations of vehicles or tools which are powered by fossil fuels. So how many level deep can we go with estimation when we estimate environmental cost of products and services based on the red flag that we have right now with us?
I think that's a great question. So the short answer is that in terms of the principle of it, the short answer is that the deeper that you can go in terms of the data that you're collecting, and how you structure that data, and how you analyze that data. The more data you have, the better quality the data that you have, the more meaningful your analysis can be, and the more meaningful then the solutions and the interventions that you've developed from it are. The problem is that very often most implementers don't really have that much detail in their data. So I think for a lot of implementers, this is a starting point where they're really starting that process to collect the data and then to publish and use the data. So a lot of our guidance at OCP speaks to this, right? Like, so we want people to start somewhere. We don't want them to be discouraged, because obviously this can be really challenging. So it doesn't mean that, well, first of all, it doesn't mean that everyone has to be perfect all at once, but that you can start with an incremental approach. So you might not have all the data now, but over time, if you start with something and then you improve your data quality or improve your data capture, then over time you can increase your analysis, and then you can increase your understanding of your performance. So I think that's the key thing. And so, for example, our red flags for integrity, we have over 77 red flags that we've identified. Most of our implementers obviously don't apply all of those red flags, right? Because again, it would be a huge administrative burden it would be onerous to try and capture all of those. So most of our implementers will isolate the red flags that they think are most relevant in their local context. In Indonesia, for example, they're using 10 of those red flags because those are the things that come up time and time and time again. And these are the red flags for integrity and red flags for anti-corruption. The red flags for conservation are brand new. They were just launched a couple of weeks ago. We're looking at the moment for testing it in different places. And again, depending on what we find there, we may find that there may be several red flags for conservation. We've identified 22, as I said. It may be that only half of them are the ones that are possible to calculate at the moment, because maybe the others in different contexts, you might not actually have the data to be able to inform it, and you need to start that process to actually collect the data and that takes time, right? Again, infrastructure projects take time, so then the data capture for new projects or to revisit old projects, that will require a process.
Thank you so much, Ben. In fact, that answers to the question I was going to ask about how flexible is developing this indicator. How can actually other people who might be testing across geography go back and contribute to adapting it at global level? So I think you did answer, but if you would like to add a point to that, it would be great.
And sorry, the question was?
How flexible is development of these indicators? So for example, someone on this call might want to test it out. Can they go back to OCP and then request and make suggestions to alter some of the indicators or add new indicators?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the work that we do here at OCP, is that we're continuously learning and we're continuously looking to improve our work and our tools and our guidance. So absolutely, we really encourage anyone who's interested to try out these red flags, to test it in your locality, and please share with us what your findings are. I think particularly for the red flags for conservation, we're at that stage now of testing and growing and learning. And it may be that when we test it in a few different countries, we may find that there are some red flags that apply for some countries, and maybe others where, for example, they don't have the data, it doesn't apply. There may be new ones that we discover that are specific to a certain political context or governance structure or government framework. So absolutely, we'd love to have recommendations, ideas, and testing. So please, absolutely, all of our work it's available online. It's free to use and reuse. So we really encourage people to do that and get in touch and share with us. And the other thing I think worth mentioning is also that we do have a lot of support for this, right? So if someone is interested in testing this out, whether the government agency or civil society organization or anyone else, we do have data experts in-house that can help you along this journey, so that this work is complex. So if you need help with thinking about what data to collect, what data to publish, and how you can use it in a meaningful way, we're here to help. And we do this obviously entirely for free at no charge to anyone.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm certain people from the participants might want to reach you out on this. There was one question that we did park for later because I think it was addressed to a broader panel. How important is drafting sustainable clauses in public contracts in order to strike balance between restrictive terms to exclude greenwashing firms and ensure fair and free competition? So I look forward to any of the panelists who might want to respond to this.
I can start. Since I have the floor, I'll abuse my position for a moment, but I'll be quick because I do want to hear from the other panelists as well. So from where we're sitting, it's absolutely crucial to be clear in your tender criteria. What exactly is it that you want in terms of the green goal or the sustainable goal that you want? Because very often projects or contracts fail because it's too vague. So that makes it difficult for bidders to understand what exactly is needed. And that makes it difficult for the government agencies to compare like for like. So you have very broad terms, for example, it's like, oh, we want to procure this thing and we need it to be sustainable. Well, what do you mean by sustainable? And different people may approach that differently, you know, as I said in my presentation, and then it makes it hard to compare like for like, and then you don't have an even playing field. So I think that's the best thing. And then the second thing is not only should the tender criteria be very clear and very explicit, but it also needs to be priced for, because very often there are all these wonderful improvements that everybody wants, you know, whether it's some kind of green goal, whether you want reduced emissions, whether you want better environmental standards, whether you want better labor standards, whatever it is. But no one wants to pay for it. And if it's not priced for, that again makes it difficult for vendors, it makes it difficult for businesses to properly bid for it, and it makes it difficult for you to get the outcome that you want. So I think those two things are absolutely key. And it goes back also to that question on greenwash, where if you don't have these things and you have very vague terms, you know, that's when it leads to greenwash, right? And that's when it leads to kind of peripheral activity masquerading as something that's green or socially responsible or whatever it is. And then in the end, it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's meaningless. So I would say that it's extremely important.
Thank you, Ben. Just wanted to check if Lisa or Dr. Shilpi would like to add to that.
I mean, I totally agree with what Ben said. I mean, totally, it's extremely important to ensure that there's a balance between what we are asking and also not kind of leading that to any kind of greenwashing. So I totally agree with her inputs.
Yes, same. I think for that's why also market engagement is very important. And that's why also some countries organize these, you know, debriefing, but also sometimes before they really engage with the markets. Because I was working on another project that's related to human rights. But for example, the city of Oslo, they have like this very, very strong human rights requirements in the tender. And to make sure that they have enough bidder, they test the model before adopting their requirement. They said they test it with the market and they ask them, if we adopt this set of requirements and clause, you think you will be able to still, you know, make it to the tender. And I think that's also an important, an important thing to have in mind. But definitely talking with the market, being very clear about what you are expecting, what you want. And I don't know if that's that can help, but I know that, for example, so for Green Public Procurement, the European Commission also have published standardized environmental criteria, so that can also helps public buyers. And when you have standardized environmental criteria, also like the market knows what to expect, they know it's the same for everyone, they know how it applies, and that can be also something useful. Yeah.
If I could just very quickly, Kabeer, sorry, but Dr. Shilpi had a really great slide with the basic criteria and the advanced criteria of, you know, how this may play out, right? So again, depending on, you know, what the priority is at the time and, you know, what you can do. I think that was there was a fantastic slide on, you know, how these different criteria could be laid out.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Lisa. Dr. Shilpi, I'm mindful that we have reached our decided time limit. So I'll just take a quick 1 minute to wrap things up and thank everyone. So it was a great panel, truly, to have discussions. And one of the key takeaways that I felt was that we have to consider market as our ally, not as an enemy, and ensure that we have a continuous engagement from the first session that Lisa talked about to a very detailed understanding about how administrative framework and regulatory regulatory framework can assist in implementation of green public procurement, with a history of that in the context of India and departments over here in Dr. Shilpi's presentation, towards wonderful presentation by Ben on how data becomes a prerequisite, a step one to be able to actually start tagging and actually using, measuring the changes that we are ultimately pushing forward. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. For the audience, very quickly, we have honor of having with us Ms. Laya Madduri. She is Secretary to Government of Assam Finance Department. She and her team have championed public finance reforms to make the system more efficient, responsive to needs of both the citizens and governments. I request ma'am to please add her motivational words to wrap up this meeting and give direction of actually implementing green public procurement in our context. I just wanted to quickly ask, ma'am, how are states and other implementation agencies thinking about adopting GPP, and what could be the possible way forward in terms of regulatory framework or behavioral changes that can facilitate adoption of GPP in an efficient manner?
Thank you, Kabeer. I thank the organizers for arranging this climate dialogue to talk about public procurement data and how it can be harnessed for delivering green solutions to climate change. In Government of Assam, we are having reforms with the help of external agencies, and also the reform started several years ago. But it got greater support with the World Bank funded project, which we have initiated in Finance Department. So there is a lot of data related to procurement, which is available in public domain and which is available for the government at various levels. Now, entire e-procurement data, which is a NIC's solution for the entire country, most of the states are using it for procurement. So we have all the procurements happening beyond the threshold, which we have recently reduced to 20 lakhs. So any procurement above 20 lakh will have to go on e-procurement portal. So there we have the data where we can see what are the different kind of goods, services, works we are procuring, and how these, basically who is getting the award and what kind of work is getting selected. That much information is available on e-procurement. And in the last year, we made procurement on GEM also mandatory. So the goods and services available on GEM have to be mandatorily procured on GEM. That's the latest stand that government has taken. So with this, there is so much data. Coming to your question, how governments are trying to leverage the procurement to to influence the way we are making decisions to deliver greener solutions. I feel we are right now having the right kind of tools which can guide us in coming up with, we can actually come up with policy recommendations. We can reform the things that we are, how we are doing things. So now under this procurement reforms, we are also developing standard bidding documents and model bidding documents in which if we can incorporate certain green elements, if you are procuring this kind of good, this has to be the energy rating. Anything below that we should not allow. Some kind of guidelines from Finance Department. If it is related to works, what climate resilient technologies do we encourage? We can incentivize, the one who is coming up with greener technology will be getting certain points, additional points in the technical evaluation. Let's say we come up with some standard like that across the departments with respect to various technologies, building roads, building embankments, everything involves huge expenditure. So in these, there is a lot of research going on, latest technologies are being implemented. In our state, in Assam, first we come across these technologies through some World Bank funded project or ADB funded project where environment concerns are taken up very seriously with proper impact assessment, and even the technologies, the climate resilient technologies are preferred over the normal technologies, even if they cost little more. Similarly, in agriculture also, we have a project in which introducing climate resilient technologies is an important component, where several climate resilient technologies like zero tillage and introducing climate resilient varieties, which are basically helping us in sustainability towards, environmental sustainability. So if these are known to us and we promote these technologies and incentivize those vendors who are involving, who are promoting greener technologies, I think a message will be sent, and huge financial outlays that are going towards these goods, services, and works can be made greener. So this year, should I go on, or should I stop here? I have like other things to share, such as green budget, resilient budget that we have introduced in this year, and how all these things can help, and how this data itself can tell us a lot of things and change the way we are making decisions and help us in making better decisions for sustainable development. I think we have right platform, right kind of situation where we have information, and we are also concerned to take the right decisions. But now it needs little bit of thinking through and coming up with policy related standards, so that all departments, all procuring entities can leverage procurement for green growth.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And we are certain and hopeful that the discussion today, with the contribution of our panelists, Ms. Lisa from OECD, Ms. Bernadine from OCP, and Dr. Shilpi Kapoor, who is a researcher from India, would be extremely helpful in exactly responding to some of the prompts which have been raised by you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with actionable outputs which can actually enable and facilitate for greener action by governments and market. So thank you so much, ma'am, again for joining us. And we'll share with you.
I'm also, I'd like to thank the participants today from OECD, the ideas that they have given, and OCP, and also EMC, where how we can incorporate green procurement with respect to services, which is less discussed or implemented in the government sector. We mostly look at the goods and works. So in services, how we can integrate green procurement. It's an interesting perspective in which we got inputs today. And I'm sure when we codify this and we find solutions to implementing these issues into our day-to-day procurement decisions, definitely there will be a very silent but transformational impact of incorporating these aspects into our procurement processes. So I once again thank you for inviting me for this and organizing such a very important topic, where brainstorming, for giving the platform through webinar to discuss the thing that is of great concern today. And if we all join hands, I think all the states start looking at it. At Government of India level also, more and more states have started introducing green budget, but taking it forward with green procurement and encouraging green practices. I'm sure if we can quantify it, we will make a sea of difference within very short period with these, by adopting these suggestions. So once again, I thank you all for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks to all the attendees who were here with us through and through. We, on an average, saw more than 50, 40 attendees, which is a great number for this information, this particular discussion. And again, thanks to everyone, specifically who have joined from different time zones. Lisa, thank you so much for joining from Paris, Ben from Britain, and all the participants who have joined, I can see from Rome and other places as well. Thank you so much again, and we hope to take this conversation to a positive conclusion and share with you a brief report, at least on the key pointers and recommendations which are going to emerge out of it.
Thank you, and thank you for the great facilitation, Kabeer.
Yeah, thank you very much.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.